Hello, good afternoon class. My name is Miss Edwards and I will be teaching 7th grade math today. Our lesson will be over experimental probability and theoretical probability. I'll begin by writing the definitions on the board before we begin our lesson. The two definitions that I will explain. The first is experimental probability. Experimental probability is found by repeating an experiment and observing the outcomes. So we can go ahead and write down this note in our notebook. And theoretical probability is what is expected to happen based on mathematics. So I'll go ahead and write the two equations for each, and I can answer any questions you have, and then we'll go over examples and we'll have a fun activity for class today. The two equations that we will go ahead and write down in our notebooks. I'll start with the experimental probability equation. So we write this as P in quotations is the event of, and this is going to be a fraction. So on the top half, the numerator is going to be the number of times an event occurs over the denominator, the total number of trials. And I'll give great examples for each in our activity. And the next equation that we will write down for theoretical probability is P is the event of the number of favorable outcomes over the number of possible outcomes. So an example of experimental probability, I have a coin here, if you can see. So a great example is if we flip the coin 10 times, we land on heads 7 of the times, and we flip it and we land on tails 3 of the times. We land on, the probability of that we landed on heads is 7 out of 10. Now go ahead and write that down on the board. All right, so we toss the coin 10 times. It landed on heads 7 out of the times, and tails would be 3 out of the 10. So what is the probability that we landed on heads? So P of heads is going to be 7 over 10. And the probability of tails, we will write 3 over 10. And both of these fractions are already simplified. So therefore, we will go over the example for theoretical probability with the same coin. And in this case, if we flip it, the odds of it landing on heads is 50-50. And we flip it, and the odds of it landing on tails is also 50-50. So we will go ahead and write this down on the board. So the example, a coin is tossed. So the probability of landing on heads is going to be 1/2, and the probability of tails is also going to be 1/2, because the number of favorable outcomes over the number of possible outcomes, we can only flip it once, and the possible outcomes is 2. So that's why it's a 50-50 chance. So this next example, we have a regular die, has 6 sides. So for experimental probability, let's talk about this. If we roll the die 100 times and we get the number 5, let's say 14 times. So the experimental probability of rolling a 5 would be 14 over 100, because in that experiment we attempted 100 tries and the result was 14 of the number 5s. But then with theoretical probability, we roll the die and we get a 5. You can see that. The probability for theoretical probability would be 1 over 6 because we rolled that dice once. I'll go ahead and write this on the board so that you students can write this in your journals for future reference for our worksheet. So the experimental probability, we have a die here. And we roll this 100 times. So the probability of we can just say roll a 5 would be 14 over 100 because we tried 100 times and we got 14 of those. And then for this, a die was rolled, so the probability to get a 5 would be 1 out of 6 because there are 6 sides and we got a 5 once. I hope that makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions before we begin our next example with the spinner. Spinner here, and we go ahead and spin the spinner 12 times and we land on 4 of those times. What is the experimental probability of landing on the 3? So I'll go ahead and write this on the board. We have the attempts is going to be 12 attempts and we land on 4 of the time. So our fraction will be 4 over 12, which equals 1/3. All right, so I went ahead and wrote down the problem on the board. So we spun the spinner 12 times. We landed on 4 times. So 4 over 12 is going to simplify into 1/3. That is the probability for our experiment. So let's say we have the same spinner and there's 5 equal portions of the spinner. We have the different colors here and we landed on them equally. Let's say we spun the spinner once and we landed on the number 2, which could also mean the color purple for this example. So the probability of spinning the 2 out of 5 equal tries is going to be 1/5 because we have one outcome out of 5 possible outcomes for the spinner. That wraps up our lesson for our notes today. Before we begin our activity, we will go ahead and pass out the worksheet for everyone to work in their groups and to solve the worksheet that I have created for you. Let me know if you have any questions and have a great day.